Hello, I wanted to take a minute and walk through the completion of the 10 Rules of Composition worksheet. We talked in class about the idea that composition is a basic organized plan of all the elements such as line, shape, and color in an artwork. So when we get a blank composition, where are we going to put stuff? So we need to have an understanding of some rules that can help guide us on the best places to locate um, the important elements of our artwork. So we're going to talk about that by looking at these 10 different rules. The first rule that we're going to talk about is the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is probably the most technical rule that we're going to go over, but the idea is we're going to divide our composition or our workspace into 3 rows and 3 columns. You can kind of see that down here at this photograph. 3 rows, 3 columns with the red lines. Where the red lines intersect creates 4 points. These points are going to be our focal points or our points of interest. So this is the best place to put what we want to be the most interesting part of the composition. Okay, so for example, you might put people or animals or someone's eye, something that you want to be seen in that location. A couple of examples right here shows this glass bottle on the right side. It is located and takes up 2 of those spots. The other great example I like is this lady with this piece of fabric. She takes up 2 spots, but then also the fabric lands in a 3rd spot, making this a really strong composition. So let's see how we can use this information to work on our worksheet. So if we look at the first slide, it's just the introduction telling us a little bit about what we're doing. Slide number 2 is rule number 1, the rule of thirds. So the first thing we want to do is come over here to the explanation of rules post-it note, and we're going to explain. So you can put this in your words however you would like to remember the rule of thirds. So for me, I'm going to say divide space into 3 rows and 3 columns. Put focal point at intersection of lines. Okay, so something like that, that's going to help me remember. Now what I'm going to do over in the main part of the slide is I'm going to use the elements to the right, and I'm going to design a composition that really emphasizes the rule of thirds. What is the most important parts here? So if I was going to do a campsite, maybe I would want my tent to be a focal point. So I'll put that in one of the intersections. And maybe I'll put a campfire, in the other part. So that becomes interesting. I could put in the background some mountains, and those mountains could cross over on those points in the back. So something like this is really pushing those 3 elements as the most important. Now we could have stars in the sky, we could have trees in the background, but those 3 pieces are what I'm deciding as the artist are the most important. So I'm going to put their placement in first and give it the priority spots. That's the rule of thirds. All right. Now we're ready to move on to the next rule. So the next rule is number 2. We'll go back to our slides. And the rule of 2. The rule 2 is the rule of odds. This rule states that the framed objects of the interest in the artwork with an even number of objects. So in the end, our total number of main objects should be an odd number. So we have 3 hot air balloons, we have 3 colored pencils, 3 poppies, and 3 planes. 3 is not the only odd number. You could do 5, you could do 7. It's really up to you, but the total number of objects should be odd. So I'm going to get out of here. We're going to go back over here, and I'm going to start with my explanation of rules. So total number of main elements should be odd. Okay. Again, you can type your explanation whatever you want it to be, but we just want something there so that it helps you remember what this rule of odds really means. So I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to grab some shapes. So we'll grab these circles. And I'm going to position these circles. I'm going to stretch them out. Oops, undo that. I'm going to stretch them out a little bit so they look more like circles and less like ovals that I have over there. Okay, and that looks fine. And so I'm going to make them a little bigger just to fill the page a little bit more. And that's it. 3 circles. It's odd. That's a better composition than if I would have 4 circles. All right, let's move on to the next rule. Rule number 3. Is the rule of simplification. This rule is simple. It says eliminate clutter. Allow the main part of the artwork, the main element, to really stand out and be that focal point. So we don't need a lot of extra stuff. And the example here is a really cool example of some roads, maps. So we may need all of these little road lines, but if we're making a piece of artwork from a map, we can probably eliminate a lot of those side streets and alleyways and really focus in on the main elements or the main roads. This simplifies the composition and eliminates that excess clutter that may be unneeded. So how do we do this in our workbook? I'm going to move on to slide number 4. Rule number 3, simplification. I'm going to come over here to the explanation of rule, and I'm going to say eliminate clutter. Keep it focused on the main element. All right, so let's say we're camping again. We've got our camp tent and our fire. These are the main elements in the artwork. So I'm going to make them a little bigger. And we're going to do something like that for our composition to get us started. And I want you to understand as the artist that this is a night scene. So I'm going to put some stars in the night scene. And I'm going to add more. And I'm going to move those stars around. And I'm going to try to lay it out so that I have an interesting composition and it looks nice. So I'm moving and giving things some space. Okay, now, as I look at my composition, there's a lot of stars here. Do I have enough? Do I have enough to really communicate that it's night? Or do I need more? So now I have a lot of stars. Does it make the composition more night? Does it enhance the artwork in any way? Not really. We don't need that many stars to really communicate that this is a night scene here in our piece of artwork. So that's what this rule is all about. Eliminate what you don't need. What is absolutely necessary? We really want our viewer and our artist not to be distracted by all these stars that are in our composition. We really want them to focus on the idea that this campsite is set up at night. And so we can get rid of most of, if not all of, these excess stars. We only need a few really to communicate that message. And I think that's fine. So eliminate the excess clutter. That's rule number 3. We're going to go back to our explanations and we're going to move on to the next rule. So the next rule that I have for you is we call viewer's path. And the idea here is that we want to create a composition that guides our viewer's eye around the artwork. If we're making something as a piece of artwork, we want our viewers to engage in it. We want them to spend time with it. And so we're going to arrange things that helps the viewer do that, spend time with it, see all of the important elements before they move on to the next piece of artwork. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So we're going to go on to um, slide number 5, which is viewer's path. And when we look at slide number 5, viewer's path, rule number 4, we're going to just say here, use elements to guide viewers' eye to important parts of the artwork. So if I have a duck here and I have, let's say, another duck over here, okay, the first thing that you're going to be drawn to is that large duck in the bottom right-hand corner. You may eventually make your way over to the little duck on the left side. But something that we can do as a viewer to help with this is to, well, let's try to change this up. We're going to go here and I'm going to do a little duck over here. Okay, so to connect this as an artist, we could add other elements to this that kind of create what we call an implied line. And so as I'm arranging things, I'm thinking about, I want my viewer to start with the bigger duck, and I want them to see this tiny little duck. So I added some other little ducks in there that kind of, and it doesn't have to be perfectly straight, that kind of lead the viewer's eye through the artwork. And that's what viewer's path is all about. We're trying to guide the viewer to what we want to see, what we want them to see. Okay? That's rule number 4. All right, next one is rule number 5. And this rule is facing inward. So if a subject has a face, we don't want them facing off the page. We want them facing into the center. So let's go back to our rules of composition workbook. And right here, we're on slide number 6, rule number 5, facing inward. And I'm just going to write here in the explanation, objects with faces should face toward the center. Okay, that'll help me remember what I need to know. So if I have this bicyclist, and I would put him right here on the composition, and we leave it and we say, that's it, I'm done. Your viewer is going to be questioning, what's going on the left? Where is the bicyclist going? What's happening over there? And they're going to be way more concerned about what's off the composition than what's happening on the composition. As artists, we want them to engage, so we want them to spend time. So we need to move objects that have faces back so they're facing towards the middle. The same thing here with my duck. I'm going to make sure my duck is facing inward and not facing the side of the page. So you can always put bad examples and then come down and get the X. And oops, I need to bring my X to the front. So right click, order, bring to front. There we go. And I can put things like that to remind me what I'm talking about when I'm saying facing inward. Okay, that's rule number 5. Let's go ahead and take a look at rule number 6. Rule number 6 and rule number 5 work pretty well together. With rule number 5, it was objects with faces face inward. And the next one is give them space. So if you have moving objects, you want to put space in front of them. So let's go to rule number 6, slide number 7. We'll go to the explanation of rules. Give them space means objects with faces. No, moving objects. Objects that can move need to have space to move into. So much like what we just talked about, if I took this bicyclist and I put him at the edge of the composition, there's no space for him to go. It's very hard for me, the viewer, to kind of understand why he's there. So the best thing to do for this bicycle is back him up. He doesn't have to go all the way to the other side, but back him up so he has space in front of him that the viewer can engage with and understand where he's going, what's happening. Now, a duck moves slower than a person on a bike. So that duck doesn't need quite as much space. So we could put him somewhere here. He's got space to move into. We can keep him there. But a car is an example of a very fast moving object. So we want to make sure we keep that car over to the right side so it has lots of room to move and engage with our viewer in that empty space in front of it. So slower moving objects need less space, faster moving objects need more space, but all moving objects need to have space in front of them. All right, that's rule number 6. Let's move on to rule number 7. Rule number 7 is no dividing. And this rule always seems to trip people up, but it's really fairly simple. We want to avoid bisecting the picture space. What do I mean? We want to avoid dividing it in half. We don't want to cut it in half. So let's take a look at some examples of this. We're going to move to slide number 8, rule number 7, no dividing. And in the explanation here, I'm going to put, do not cut composition in half. If I have these mountains and I position the mountains on the left side of the page and they stretch all the way across to the right side of the page and they touch both sides, whether they're at the top or bottom, wherever they're at, they are dividing the composition. They're cutting it in half. We have the top half and we have the bottom half, or the bottom section. So we want to avoid this. A really good way to do this is to break things down and separate them. You can still have a nice mountain range that stretches from one side across, but we're going to do it in steps. So this mountain range stops and this next one takes over, and we don't go straight across the page. Okay, that's a really great way to do that and not divide the composition. The discussion we've just been having is all about a composition that is horizontal, but you wouldn't want to do this vertically either. So if we had a tree, we would not want the tree to touch the top and the bottom at the same time. We would want to give it some space so that that tree had room and didn't touch the edges and cut our composition in half. I hope that makes sense with rule number 7, no dividing. All right, let's move on. We're going to do another rule here. The next one, rule number 8, I believe, is color balance. This is all about creating a composition that appears to be balanced or equal visually on both sides. So when we're doing this, color plays a huge role in the amount of weight an object has. So color balance is all about small, high contrasting objects will equal out large, dull elements. So let's talk for a minute. If I go here to our Rules of Composition workbook, I'm going to go here to the explanation of rules, and I'm just going to put that small, high contrast, or let's put small dark objects will equal larger dull objects. Or instead of dull, let's put light. All right, so I have, I don't have two circles that are exactly the same. Let's go with these two. All right, I have these two circles. We're going to put one over here on this section, one over here on this section. Right now, when I look at this composition, the right side of the composition is much heavier than the left side of the composition because the left is lighter in color. So the dark black circle gives it weight and makes it heavy. So this idea of color balance is we need to adjust the size and the colors of the objects so that we can equal out both sides of the composition, making a nice balanced composition. So I'm going to make this circle smaller. This large, smaller dark object is going to be on this side. And I'm going to take my larger dull object, lighter object, and put it on this side. So by doing something like that, still this may be actually a little bit too big. That looks better. By doing something like this and arranging the colored and the shapes, I can still create a balanced composition with the size and the color of the object. So the smaller circle will balance out a larger dull circle. Now, we can also do things like this. If I have circles that are similar, I can move this circle closer to this circle. And I can create balance that way too. So left and right, the composition, actually I'm going to move this one back a little, look a little heavy there on the left. So something like this, the placement also plays a role, okay? As far as the best example, the cleanest, most simple example of this, I'm going to go back to this for my final example, okay? The small dark object will equal a larger dull object. That's rule number 8, color balance. All right, we're getting there. We have 2 more rules to do. So rule number 9 is no bullseye. Objects should be off-center. Don't put objects directly in the center of the composition. Now, what we haven't talked about is that you can't abide by all of these rules all of the time. Sometimes you're going to have a composition that is a bullseye. It's a requirement. Say you're taking a photo that's going to be used for a passport picture, or you're getting your photo taken for a driver's license. That must be a bullseye picture. But if you can avoid a bullseye picture, that's one of the rules of composition. So don't put objects in the directly in the center. Okay, there we go. So what do I mean exactly? So if I have this campfire and I put it right here in the middle, that offset it. There you go. That is a bullseye. It's right in the center of the composition. So it would be better to take this campfire and just slide it off to the side and put some stars that are also off to the side. I got smushed. Something like that. And that creates a nice off-center composition, stronger than that center focus bullseye. All right, that's rule number 9. Rule number 10 is our last rule, and this rule is no kissing. Objects should be not touching each other's edges. You give them space, allow them to overlap. Okay, so no kissing. So we're going to go to slide number 11, rule number 10, no kissing. And I'm just going to put over here in my explanation, objects should not just touch. They should have space or overlap. Okay, so if I have 2 circles in a composition and I put them next to each other and they are positioned like this, let's say I feel like I have a border on this that's causing it to look like it doesn't have, but they're not touching. Okay, there we go. These 2 circles are just touching, just touching. This doesn't create any drama. This doesn't create any intense feeling between these 2 circles. They're just there. So if we want to create a little bit more suspense between these 2 pieces, we can back them up a little bit and give them just a little bit more space. That's more interesting. That little bit of space, what's happening? Are they going to touch? Gets us more excited or interested in the artwork. The other thing that we can do that would be more interesting to look at would be we could arrange the circles in a way that they overlap, that they're connected or they're joined in some way. And that becomes visually more interesting than just touching. The same can be said about these circles with the edge of the composition. So if we have it just touch the edge of the page, like so, that's less interesting than if we cut it off and we overlapped it over the edge of the page. So again, I could come in with my little X and put an X right on top of this. Okay, as a bad example, we don't want things to just touch. We want to give them space or we want to let them overlap. So again, you can pick and choose one or two or three or four of these rules to use in your artwork. But the more you think about composition and purposefully place your objects in your artwork, your composition and your artwork will be better. So I hope that you learned some great rules about composition here with this video and this worksheet. If you do have any concerns or questions about the concept, please reach out and let me know. Otherwise, enjoy the process.